Axel. All right, let's look at your aperture images here. Beautiful, beautiful color and beautifully shallow depth of field. But it looks as if you changed the focal length of the lens instead of the aperture, or the aperture very little. So this image was made with the focal length at 27 millimeters and this one at 55 millimeters, and that's why we're seeing shallower depth of field. So what I wanted you to do was stay in the same place and use the same focal length of the lens and just change the aperture. Okay. Distance from subject. So you also changed the focal length here and the aperture. So beautiful, beautifully shallow depth of field, but you changed the aperture and the focal length of the lens. So f5.6 at 55 millimeters and f29 at 34 millimeters. So one or the other, okay? And focal length of the lens, and these work beautifully. They both show shallow depth of field, but you definitely changed the focal length of the lens, and the only reason the aperture changed is because of that change, I believe, is because of that change in the focal length. The depth of field is so shallow because the aperture is quite large. But beautiful images. This one especially, I think, is lovely with the line of the lights going back and then kind of continued with, looks like a rope or something, and then electric lines. So lovely images here, especially. If you want to redo the assignment, I would be happy to regrade and to see them, definitely. All right. Thanks, Axel. Daniela, okay, here are your aperture images. So f2.8 and f22, and quite a difference in the depth of field. Beautiful. Calla lilies. Yeah, nice change in the depth of field. I would like you to have used a different or shot in a different situation for each segment or for each grouping. So a different one for aperture than distance and focal length of lens. That said, I think you did a nice job. So here we have distance from subject. So this one is closer and then further away. And if we come in closer this way, we can certainly see a change in the depth of field. Because you use such a large aperture, f2.8, the depth of field is still shallow when you've moved further back. It's just not as shallow as when you're closer in, okay? And then focal length of lens, 28 millimeters and 75, again at f2.8. So the depth of field is still shallow at 28 millimeters, but it is much shallower at 75 millimeters. So in order to show greater depth of field with the shorter portion of the lens, you might try using a larger f-stop number, a smaller aperture. But you certainly don't need to redo them. You've done a good job here at showing the change in the depth of field. Okay, thank you, Daniela. Luis Hernandez, I'm not quite sure what's going on here, Luis. Maybe you want to get back to me on that, but why don't you reread the assignment and also the section, the discussions on depth of field, so you can maybe redo the assignment. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Come to my office hours and or email me. Okay, thanks. Marek, let's look at your aperture images. So this first one at f3.5 and then at f22. So definitely, there is definitely a change in the depth of field. There's also a change in the exposure, and I think that's because your ISO is so high. It doesn't need to be quite that high. So the camera kind of ran out of settings at the extreme. At any rate, good job at showing the change in depth of field, and I think this one with the soft focus in the background works really, really beautifully. All right. Distance from subject. So you're further back here and then coming in close. And actually this one where you're further back still shows relatively shallow depth of field, and that's because you're using such a relatively large aperture, which gives shallow depth of field, so that even when you're further back in the away from the point of focus, the depth of field is still shallow. It's much shallower, obviously, when you come in close. Look at the funny shape that becomes, like a donkey's head. Sorry. Anyway, much shallower depth of field here. So good job on both of those. And let's see, you submitted your focal length images. So take a look at those. And this is with a focal length of 25 millimeters and then 70 millimeters, both, I should say both at f5.6, but the aperture changes with the changing focal length of the lens. But anyway, much shallower depth of field here at 70 millimeters than at 25. So, okay, good job. Thank you, Marek.